COP26 finished late last night and we're still ploughing through the wealth of detail, but the immediate reactions were mixed, to say the least. I'm joined now by Labour's Shadow Business and Energy Secretary, Ed Miliband. Good morning, Mr. Miliband.
Morning, Trevor.
2 weeks of talking, and some say that yesterday was a substantial breakthrough. Others say COP was a flop. Where are you on this?
Well, I would say that after Glasgow, Trevor, 1.5 degrees, keeping 1.5 degrees alive is, frankly, in intensive care. And it's our job in the next 12 months to show that we can save it. The reason I say that is because the task of Glasgow and the task of the world is to halve global emissions over the coming decade. That's by 2030. That's what the scientists tell us is necessary to keep 1.5 degrees alive. And the truth about Glasgow, despite some progress, is that the world is only probably about 20% or 25% of the way to that goal. So there is a chasm now between where we need to be in halving global emissions, and all major countries have to step up and play their part in that, and where we are.
You've actually said that the developed countries have a particular responsibility to those countries which are still developing. Essentially, that countries like Britain, European countries and so on have the bigger burden to play here. Did yesterday's result tell you that we in the developed world have failed in that responsibility, or have we succeeded?
I think we are dragging our feet, really, in a very problematic way. You know, I was part, Trevor, of the 2009 Copenhagen summit, the equivalent of Glasgow's summit yesterday. And at that summit, a promise was made to developing countries, which is to developing and vulnerable countries, that $100 billion of finance, public and private finance, will be provided to them by the richer world. And this is about an existential crisis that so many of these countries are facing. And so many of them talked so movingly at these talks about the fact that their countries will literally disappear if action is not taken. Well, the problem is that more than a decade on, this finance has not been delivered. And the key thing, Trevor, is that there isn't just a moral reason to do that. There is also, frankly, a self-interest reason, because the reason that the Paris summit of 2015 succeeded in a way perhaps that Glasgow didn't is that an alliance was built of vulnerable countries on the one hand and developed countries like ours on the other to drive forward ambition and also put pressure on big countries like China to act. Now, because in the final hours of this summit, developing countries were still arguing about whether this 100 billion would be provided, I'm afraid that coalition wasn't properly formed. And I just have to sort of say, I have nothing but praise for Alok Sharma, who you're having on later on, and the job he did as COP president. But I'm afraid the rest of the government didn't help him and undermined him with decisions like cutting overseas aid, because we were then saying to other countries, please step up on climate finance, when we were stepping back on aid to poorer countries.
Well, whether the rest of government helped or not, let's just deal with what happened yesterday. Had you been sitting in Alok Sharma's seat and the Indians and the Chinese, and nobody seems to be mentioning the Australians, had turned up and said, look, this phasing out coal's got to go, let's have a phrase like phasing down, what would you have done? Would you have accepted that, or would you have said, I'd rather have no agreement than this agreement?
Well, look, I'm very hesitant to second-guess Alok, because I think he's done an amazing job, to be honest, and I think he's impressed people around the world with his diligence and his commitment and his integrity. I wish that the last-minute change hadn't been made, but I wasn't privy to those discussions. I think there is a wider lesson here, though, which is we need to do more to put pressure on all of the big emitters, frankly. That includes India, that includes China, it includes countries like Australia, Trevor. You know, we're doing a trade deal with Australia, and we've agreed to drop the Paris temperature commitments from the trade deal. Now, Australia is a real laggard on climate. They've got a net zero target to get to zero emissions in 2050, but it's not really a proper plan. And they've got 2030 targets that, if every country was doing what they're doing, would take us to 4 degrees of warming. Now, that would be catastrophic for the world if we ended up in that position. So I think part of the lesson of what's going to be different in the next 12 months compared to the last 12 months is that for all countries, the climate policy can't sit on the side of their other approaches, of their other policies. It's got to be at the heart of what we do. We should be rewriting that Australian trade deal. We should be saying to Australia, look, I'm afraid if you want to be part of the Club of Nations, if you want a trade deal with us, then you've got to step up. And I think it's really important that we can't leave Glasgow. Glasgow was modest progress. It wasn't the transformation we needed, but we can't leave Glasgow and if you like, step back. The fight to really keep 1.5 alive starts here in the run-up to COP27.
Well, this comes right to the point, doesn't it? What are we prepared to give up to make this kind of thing happen? Because China and India and pretty much everybody else can say always, you can yell at us as much as you like, but until you do your part, why should we make our citizens suffer? And let's just start. The 100 billion that you rightly referred to hasn't yet been delivered. I mean, how are the small states, island states, are supposed to believe anything that we say when we haven't even fulfilled a pledge from 12 years ago?
I mean, you are completely right about this, Trevor. You're completely right. And, it's the 100 billion. And as I say, we should restore the overseas aid cut. Look, we cutting overseas aid was the single worst decision this government made in the run-up to COP, because it undermined our moral authority. It meant that when we were going to the French, the Germans, the others, and saying, please step up on climate finance, they were saying, well, how can you tell us to step up? You're the only G7 country to cut aid. But, it's not just about the issue of the 100 billion, because the 100 billion, it might surprise your viewers to know this. The 100 billion is, in a sense, the starting point for the cost these countries are going to face. But it's also about things like vaccination. It is a scandal that when you look across the developing world, we've got 1 or 2% of populations in some parts of the developing world that have been vaccinated. And I'm afraid we haven't. Boris Johnson said at the G7 summit in Cornwall that we would vaccinate the world by the end of 2022. We are way off that. This is an issue of trust too. And, the whole thing here, abroad and at home, is that this is a matter of collective solidarity. This is a matter of whether we are in it together. We're in it together globally, and we're in it together in Britain as well. Whether we're going to guarantee that we don't just have ambition in tackling the climate crisis, but we also have justice. And those two things are absolutely intimately linked.
All right. Well, look, I mean, I hear what you're saying and, I feel your indignation. But let's get to the raw politics of this. The truth is, it's a hard sell. For us to do our part on this, we have to be talking to our population about new boilers, 18 grand a shot, electric cars, way more expensive than anything that anybody gets in behind the wheel on today, more insulation. Now, is Labour going to be saying to the population, look, everybody, we know this is going to cause us pain, but realistically, we're going to have to bear that pain if we're going to meet these objectives. Are you ready for that?
Well, I tell you what I'm going to be saying, and what we have said, which is we have set out a pledge to invest £28 billion extra each and every year between now and 2030 in tackling the climate crisis. And the reason this matters to your question, Trevor, is we have to make this fair for the population. We have to make this fair for citizens. So, the truth is that the cost of electric cars are coming down, but we should be giving zero interest loans to people so that lower and middle income families can afford electric cars. We should be doing more to help subsidize people in the transition to zero carbon heating so that it doesn't cost people more than a new boiler. And I'll be absolutely explicit with you, Trevor. I think it is right to make this investment now. It's right to borrow to make that investment. And here's the thing. This is the prudent and responsible choice, because the normal argument people make against government borrowing to invest is that it will store up debts for future generations. The biggest debt we can store up for future generations is not tackling this crisis. And there is a fascinating report from the Office of Budget Responsibility published in July, which says the costs of climate action, delaying by a decade the costs of climate action doubles the overall cost. So acting now is the right thing to do morally, it's the right thing to do economically, and it's the right thing to do to create jobs in our country, to tackle fuel poverty. And I'll give you one very concrete example, literally. A national program of home insulation and retrofit around this country, street by street, house by house, could cut bills, cut carbon emissions, create jobs, and make us less dependent on international gas. This makes economic sense.
All right. Well, let's see if there's a pledge that can be made here. Cut emissions by half by 2030, net zero by 2050, and Labour will do whatever is necessary, to coin a phrase used by the current Chancellor, whatever it takes to meet the initial outlay for the consumer and the citizen to meet those pledges. Labour will do whatever it takes.
Well, we absolutely have to do whatever it takes. And actually we need to go further and faster than the numbers that you just said. And look, the reason this matters is because if we end up, look, after Glasgow, the scientists tell us that on the basis of the pledges made by countries, we're heading for 2.4 degrees of warming. Now, that might sound to some people quite harmless, but you know what it means? It means billions more people facing extreme heat waves. We had terrible floods in Doncaster, in my constituency, in 2019 and in 2007. It means more extreme weather events like that. And the other thing is that I'm not just in the let's avoid disaster business, because actually by investing, we can create good jobs. We can tackle fuel poverty. We can create cleaner air. See, I think part of the argument that people like me need to make this stronger, Trevor, just to make the point, is that this is about creating a better world and a better life for people.
All right. Well, let's bring the people of Doncaster into this conversation. Everybody can say, we must do this. Everybody can be on the side of virtue. But when you say to them on the doorstep, by the way, this is going to cost you thousands of pounds because we have to do it, otherwise, other people will be underwater, we'll have all sorts of problems. Do they say in Doncaster, yes, we understand, Mr. Miliband, yes, I'm going to start saving now? Or do they say, not sure about that?
I think I'm saying something different to you, Trevor. And I think this is a difference between our approach and the government's approach, because we're lucky in this country that both parties want to tackle this problem, but we've got different ways of doing it. I'm saying to you that government needs to make the investment so that it's financially possible for people to make the change.
Yeah, but government's money doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of that, the people that vote for you.
Well, I'm saying something quite explicit to you, though. I'm saying we borrow now to make this investment because it will save money in the long run, and it's the prudent and responsible choice. You see, I think the British people are in a very...
We will eventually have to pay it back.
I think yes, but we'd have to pay a lot more back if we didn't act. You see, I think the British people are in a very sensible place on this. I think they're saying, we want to go green, we want to do the right thing, but don't make this a rich person's luxury. Make it possible for us to make this change, and we will come with you. And also, don't look both ways. Don't cut air passenger duty for domestic flights. Don't do things which suggest you're saying one thing and doing another.
All right, just very briefly, every time I've asked the question I'm about to ask you to your colleagues, they've prevaricated. New oil field on stream, possibly in Scotland, Cambo it's called. A new coal production facility in Cumbria. Surely after yesterday, Labour must now say neither of those should go ahead.
You're right. Neither of them should go ahead. No prevarication, clarity. We cannot have the Cambo oil field going ahead because it's the equivalent of 18 coal-fired power stations running for a year. We should not be having a new coal mine in Cumbria. frankly, it looks like total hypocrisy when we are trying to persuade other countries to act. You're right, Trevor. This does change things. We do need to show we're going to act, and we need to show that we're not facing both ways as a country. That's been the problem with this government, and we need clarity and strength when it comes to the climate emergency.
Ed Miliband, that is appreciated. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.